Welcome to another amazing episode of Toot Your Own Horn, Music Matters. We are here with the one and only Ronny Loew. Welcome, Ronny.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you. We are always interested in hearing how things get started in your musical journey. How did yours start?
Well, like many, I started in school. When an instrument was offered, we had just had a chamber orchestra come from the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and I heard the clarinet carrying through the gymnasium and reverberating all over, and I thought that was the coolest sound I had ever heard. So I started on clarinet. About a year later, I noticed that there wasn't much clarinet in the music I was listening to, but there was a lot of saxophone. And so I sat my parents down at the ripe age of 10, had a meeting with them, and said I need to switch to saxophone. As a professional, I later came to somewhat regret not sticking with clarinet longer because of the fingerings that allow you to understand the flute and the clarinet and all woodwinds. So that's come back to bite a little bit, but I've had a lot of fun and been performing for 40 years and seen the world and done a lot of really cool things.
Now, did your choice of saxophone come to you naturally, or did somebody bug you at school to do that? Or
It was really just the radio. There was
what were you listening to?
Well, it was just pop radio, and there was a song. I remember which song. There was a sax solo at the beginning of the song, "Harden My Heart" by Quarter Flash.
Yeah.
Which is pretty funny, thinking back to it and what it was. But it was just a really gutsy tenor, line at the beginning of the song, and that was the one that made me like go, I like this. I want to sound like that. And then later on, so that was what kicked it off for me. And then later, I was doing a cross the street babysitting job for the neighbor, and they came home one day and said, "I'm not paying you today." And I said, "Why? What did I do wrong?" And she said, "Instead, I'm giving you this." And she gave me a David Sanborn cassette. And that became the new, like, oh my gosh, I loved the sound of David Sanborn and everything he was about. And that started me on this journey of who David was, who he played with, who those people played with, and how we always used to sit and look at liner notes and the back of a record when they had records.
Yeah.
And just sort of explore all the stuff you liked and find those networks.
And so is that what led you on the journey? Just was all of the pop music you like to hear, or the things you were listening to on the radio?
Yeah, I loved listening to music, always have. And initially it was a band versus choir choice. We had to pick a credit, and I picked band, and I didn't like practicing yet. I didn't realize the correlation between putting in work and improvement at that point. I just wanted to take the easy route as a preteen. And so I was always last chair, and it wasn't a lot of fun at first. And eventually I took my horn home. I practiced, I learned my part, and I got called out for doing it right the next day in class. And that felt good and gave me the reinforcement, and it started the path. And then I was in every band I could get into. I was in marching band and loved that. Just all the experiences through marching band. A lot of kids get certain life lessons through sports, and I wasn't athletic, but I got them through being a part of a 180 person marching band. The dedication to being part of something, the hard work for results and perfection and winning and something bigger than yourself and all the different things. I got them through band, and we'd spend every summer traveling with 180 friends all over the country, and it was just a really great experience for me. So that was really what kicked it off, and then ended up going on to college in music. I went to Berklee and learned an immense amount there, and then made contacts everywhere. So that was quite a journey.
And it led you not into exactly the profession, but still very much in the profession. Can you explain how you made the choice and how you wound up being in and not in at the same time? Your involvement in music?
So all of my 20s into my early 30s, I was a full-time professional musician. And, through the contacts I had made and everything, I had 100 stamps on my passport by the time I was 30 from playing all over the world. Really loved it and enjoyed it, and still love playing. At the point where I became a father, priorities shift a little bit, wanted to be able to provide the kind of upbringing that I had, and that wasn't happening from playing 5 nights a week at a nightclub. And, I was also missing some evenings and, bedtime stuff with my kids that really just didn't feel in sync with my heart. And so I also took on a day job, something I never thought I would do, but, parenting was so motivating. So I took on a day job and still played, um, you know, a dozen or so gigs a month for a long, long time. And now I'm probably at, 6 to 8 gigs a month still. So I'm certainly in it, playing all the time. Played last weekend, playing tomorrow night. I've got lots of stuff going on, but also have a very, very heavy day job that keeps me real busy and doing a lot of travel as well.
What was it like to make that decision? I think musicians really struggle with trying to figure out how to stay in the profession and yet also adult, right? Things happen, like you children and a house.
100%, 100%. I always expected that music would be, and now still know music will always be there. And I hope to play until I die. I remember growing up, watching Dizzy Gillespie play, in his very, very much later years. And I just watched a podcast of the bassist Ron Carter, who used to play with Miles Davis. He's, I think, 88 and still doing a full tour schedule. And so, I don't love the sound of retirement, like full retire and sit around and watch TV and in a rocking chair. That will never work for me. So I will eventually retire from the day job and keep performing, because that's my love, and that's what keeps your brain sharp, and that's so many things. But the decision, like I said, I really reached a point as a young father with a 2-year-old that what I was able to provide wasn't cutting what my heart was telling me I wanted to provide. And, living off my reserve credit and trying to get back up to zero every month just wasn't cutting it. And I went to a friend of mine who was in the mortgage business, and I said, I don't love where my daughter's growing up. Can you help me get into a house? And he said, well, if you got 12 canceled rent checks and a good credit score, yeah, I can help you get in a house. But if you want to make some money and, take better care of your family, I could teach you this job and hire you. And that was a huge, huge change. And I took some time to think, a few hours really, and, sat down with my dad, who was my consigliere at the time, and thought about it and said, this is what I need to do. And same day I said, let's do it. Tell me where to start. And my first day on that job was 9/11, in fact.
Oh my gosh.
So it was an interesting time, because I went from, like I said, kind of living off reserve credit and trying to support a family, scary stuff, to, doing really well because of the refinance boom that happened right after 9/11. And I was in that career for 11 years, and it was great, and then changed into the one I'm in now. But I've always kept my finger on the pulse of music and have a somewhat flexible job where I can go and perform, whenever I'm called. So it works out really well.
Yeah. What advice would you give to young musicians out there? Because that's one of the reasons why, as you know, we talked about in a conversation we had before about Working Musicians Academy and the need to try to help musicians find ways to earn money within their profession. What advice would you give them to try to help them navigate that? Because it's a hard one.
It is a hard one. And I think, there are so many great tools out there right now, that would help with, it depends how young the musicians are, right? If they're still in school or if they're out trying to start making a living. But if you're if you're in school, I would say versatility is key. The doubling conversation I brought up earlier, if I had stayed with clarinet, I'd be able to play all the flutes and piccolo and oboe and bassoon, and then clarinet, alto, clarinet, bass clarinet, and regular clarinet. I'd be able to play all the saxophones, and that leads to more opportunities. I'd also say learn some keyboard. And if you can, if you have a decent voice, which I really don't, be able to sing some backgrounds, because that kind of versatility leads to more opportunities for sure. The other thing I would say then, when you're out of school and when you're looking to book, is that the book events and things is if you have your own group and you're trying to book opportunities, even as a solo artist with background tracks. I mean, there are websites out there. There's all kinds of stuff coming across my social media offering strategies on how to book events and using AI and using all the tools available today to get yourself out there and have a decent online an online representation of what you do, website, social media, some recordings, some media, some photos, and you can start cheap. You don't have to have everything professionally done for tons and tons of dollars. You can certainly start with what you can get organically and with a friend and a cell phone, and then grow from there. But being able to have something online that people can find you and get a taste of what you do is incredibly important, because people aren't always going to come out to your next gig and see you. They're too busy, or people are lazy, and they want everything they can get on their phone these days. So you have to have something that encourages them to come out and see you live, or to hire you for their event. The other thing I would really say, that was a big turning point in my life, is don't be afraid to put yourself out there and give to receive. And the story I would say that goes along with this is I had an opportunity once. This was after college. I had a friend who was taking bands regularly to Germany and performing. And I happened to be over in Switzerland right nearby with another band. And I had a couple of nights off, and I knew that they were going to be there. And I said, I want to come and play with you. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't have the budget. And I said, I don't need to get paid. If you could just give me a place to sleep, I'll pay my own train ticket. I just want to come and experience it. And I went and played a weekend at this club in Munich, Germany with this band. And at the end of the weekend, the owner of the club, this big kind of ominous German man with a big beard and a big belly, he says, come with me. And he took me into the back of the kitchen, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And he said in, real thick German accent, I heard you played this weekend for free. And I said, yes. And I said, it was a great time. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much. And he reached into his wallet and he took out a wad of cash and handed it to me. And he said, I told that band never to come back without you again. And that led to my being in Germany once or twice a month for about 6 or 7 years. And had it not been for me just putting myself out there, that never would have happened. And it led to all kinds of amazing opportunities. It led to playing in castles and for major events, and great experiences in nightclubs with incredible musicians and bands and great energy and appreciative audiences. And, if I hadn't just said, I don't care about getting paid, just let me play, that whole thing wouldn't have happened, that whole chapter of my life.
That's an amazing story.
It was really neat. I've told it to my kids too, not because they're in music necessarily, but just in life, is just, don't hesitate to go do something for the experience and what might come of it.
Mhm. That is one of the things about participating in music. You always get something new, pretty much.
Oh, certainly. The angles and the connections are unbelievable. Like I said, I when I went to Berklee in Boston, it had the highest percentage of international students of any college in the Boston area. And that's a city that has, at that time anyway, I don't know what the stat is now, but it had 30 colleges and universities. No, excuse me, 500 colleges and universities within a 30-mile radius. That doesn't sound right either. I'm losing the stats, but the point is, a lot of college students and a lot of institutions, and the highest percentage was at Berklee. And so you go into the cafeteria and every table had a different language going. And as a result, I've met people from all over the world, and then eventually would leverage those contacts to be able to go there and perform. And, it just opened up a whole world that I never would have experienced as a, suburban kid from Minnesota, just, playing in marching band. So yeah, definitely leads to amazing opportunities, chances to meet really neat people. In fact, one of the people I work with, he's a singer, he's a producer, puts on, I think about 200 shows a year that he either sings in or leads and puts together, employs about 75, 80 musicians in all these different shows. The guy also runs a charity on his own, and helps, he's helped 125,000 families in Minnesota and Western Wisconsin over the last 10 years. And it's just an amazing experience to meet people who are so giving and so caring, and all the different avenues that have opened up because of it have been incredible.
I always have this fantasy of bringing music into the workplace in terms of trying to get more people to be involved, and it's always great to hear that there's somebody at work that already is doing that, but have you ever or been able to bring it into your environment at all? What kind of, I mean, I know people clearly have enjoyed hearing you play and you've got a following, but have you ever had any crossover there? Has anyone ever wanted to learn because of hearing you or anything like that?
Yeah, somewhat. There's at the company that I'm at right now, it's an IT company, and it just so happens, maybe you've seen this too, that a lot of people in music end up in IT and technology. There's some brain synapse firing that creates an aptitude for that. So there are a number of people at my company who are singers and musicians of other kinds, and we do all talk about, yeah, sometime we'll get the company band together. But if you have five bass players, a saxophone player, and and a piccolo, it doesn't quite make a band. But we do all get together and talk about it, and send each other clips online and just keep the love for music alive. And I always at shows when we're packing up, people will come up and say hi, and how many of them say, I used to play saxophone. I wish I had stayed with it. And um, I think there is more of a desire to perform, and I think the fact that it's not as easy. Uh, I get grief from saying this, which is why I'm hesitating. But tell me if you agree with this, Lisa. If you walk up to a keyboard or a piano, you can push a button or a key and you get a sound.
Uh-huh.
If you hit a drum, you get a sound. If you hit a cymbal, you get a sound. If you pluck a guitar string or a bass string, you get a sound. But when it takes an embouchure and fingerings and all that on, brass instruments or woodwind instruments, I think there's a certain level of frustration and atrophy that happens if you don't stay with it, where this is a thing where if you snooze you lose, or that's not it. If you don't use it, you lose it. I was looking for the right cliche. So I think those that did it appreciate it and enjoy it and wish they had stayed with it. And I do find a lot of people that would love to get started on an instrument. And I don't think it's ever too late to start.
Yeah, I don't know I think part of the problem with the wind instrument is that you have to use your breath. I mean, you have to still have breath support even when you play the guitar because you have to understand a phrase. So you have to know where to breathe in the phrase, even if you're not physically breathing, right?
It's a good
Like
point. Yeah,
instrument.
yeah.
However, I do think that because you have to use your breath and you have to use your fingers, those two things make it a little different than some of the other instruments. And also, then you have the complication of either the reed or the strength of your face, because it's not just the blowing, it's actually a muscle that you develop around how you blow into the instrument. And
Yeah.
so I think that is also a deterrent because if your hands don't feel great, you can still pluck strings, even though you might not get the best timbre or sound or intent of the way the note speaks. You still can make the sound, but I think it's harder because of those things. And yet, it's so much more rewarding because at least I grew up coming from Northwestern University, and my teachers were always about the human voice. Like it's really about communication and about the ability to communicate and express. And in order to do that, that's the closest thing to the human voice. And so the more you can mirror that that expression through sound, the more you'll connect with your audience. And so it was always about the quality of sound over the technique. Not that technique didn't matter, but that it was secondary to being able to touch someone with the way you could speak or voice.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Well said. It is a voice. It really is a voice. And that's another thing that's so important for young people that are getting into playing an instrument, is they have to listen.
Mm.
You have to listen, like I was talking about earlier, where I heard saxophone players I really liked. That gave my mind a sense, or a mental image, if you will, of what I thought the horn was supposed to sound like. And then the more you practice and you try with different equipment and your musculature develops and everything, then your physiology starts to emulate a sound that represents you. And I think a lot of saxophone players can do blind. I watched it. It was such a neat video. It was on YouTube, and it was a jazz saxophone player doing a blindfold test. He had someone next to him with a laptop, and I think they did maybe 50 different saxophone players. And this guy had the blindfold on, and from their sound, he could identify 50 different saxophone players. And that just goes to show how each person sounds different. Sometimes it's the way they sound, their voice, if you will, through the instrument. And sometimes it's the choice of notes that they play if they're improvising in jazz, or the style of music that they're playing. But everyone has an individual sound that that really requires a lot of listening over a period of years to develop, as well as your practicing.
Do you think that those early experiences of hearing saxophone players that you admired, were you like fantasizing about what it was like to be them, or were you really caught up in how to sound like them? Neither of which, like really happens, right? Because you're yourself and you have your own sound as well as your own life, right? Your own path.
Yeah.
Do you think
Well,
that's
no,
the first catch? Like that's the
I
piece?
yeah, I would fanboy over these guys, and I wanted to be them. I mean, it was much more than just sounding like it. I wanted their life. I wanted to be on tour. I wanted to be on stage. I loved that whole experience, or at least what I perceived it to be as a young person. Later in life, as I had friends that were on tour with the biggest names in the world, Whitney Houston in the late 90s, I had friends on that tour. Stevie Wonder and Shaka Khan and the Backstreet Boys. I mean, on and on and on. But anyway, a lot of those friends, when I went and did the fatherhood thing, some of those friends went the road warrior direction. And after, decades, we'd get back together, and everyone thinks the grass is always greener. I'd look at their experience and think, oh, you've been living it, and not regretting my life, but kind of a look over your shoulder. What if?
Right.
And then they'd look at me, they'd come visit my family between legs of a tour and come over and have dinner. And we're in the background grilling and throwing a Frisbee around with the kids. And they'd say, man, I wish I had what you have. Just, the life doesn't quite pan out to be what everybody wants it to be. Because to have the dedication to be on the road for, 14 months at a time, isn't as conducive to having a normal family relationship. And so you don't have to make those decisions as a teenager or a student getting excited about music. Not everybody needs to decide to become a professional, but
and yet that experience of pretending to be, whether it's being a Swiftie or whatever it is, right? Having this vision of what it would be like, I think is really key to participating, because
for sure.
I think it's a very early unlock, and it's a great way for people to get engaged. And I think that music has a huge role for not, fantasizing what could be, but also trying it out, even if it's not ever going to be, right? Just because it allows you to express yourself in a way that you otherwise wouldn't, and it connects different dots and
100%. Beautifully said. I absolutely agree with you. While you were talking, it reminded me of a high school talent show that I did. And, going back to the David Sanborn cassette, I entered to play a song, and it was a David Sanborn song. And I learned every part, and I taught the keyboard player the keyboard part. I taught the bass player the bass part, and I taught everybody. And we rehearsed, and we got up there, and I got to step into that life for 3.5 minutes or whatever it was. And I was the kind of euphoria, dopamine, whatever, that I felt during that moment and after it was enough to get me hooked for life. So even with a serious day job, there's nothing like music to go and blow the stress of the day or the week out through your horn and just connect with your passion.
And the trick is to find kindness around you, which leads into my next question. If you were going to tell someone what to do in order to pick up a wind instrument, like tomorrow, like go try it out, what would you tell them to look for or to do?
Well, I would tell them you have to practice through the boring parts. I would say there's no time that's too late to start. Even older people, when you have a little more time in your life, every age group is fine. I think people get hooked on the concept that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I disagree. So I would say go for it is the first thing. The second thing I would say is get a good teacher. It seems like every community, maybe not every, but many communities have a strip mall with a music store and somebody who's probably like us, who loves to share and teach. And I think lessons are important. You can get somewhere on YouTube, but you can get farther with having somebody actually show you and give you feedback and tell you how to breathe and how to hold it and really cut to the chase. And then the next part is no momentum, no progress, no fun. So what I used to do before the spark lit for me was I would just go to my lessons poorly prepared, and I get told the same thing over and over again. I didn't feel any progress and I wasn't having any fun. And I could feel that the teacher was frustrated with me and I was frustrated and everybody was frustrated. And I just didn't put together in my mind that if you spend as little as 15 minutes a day just doing what the teacher said to do, you get to build stepping stones and foundation that you build upon each lesson. And then all of a sudden you get from the squeaking and squawking to actually, you get through the, hot cross buns part to actually being able to play something that feels good. And then, it just continues from there. So don't give up too soon. Practice through the boring part and, no momentum, no progress, no fun.
Find somebody kind who's willing to teach you and not gonna try to show off or try to impress you, but just help you. And there's a lot to be said for sitting right next to someone. I've been saying this a lot lately. I feel like our world needs people to sit next to each other and hear each other breathe and to see each other's body posture and to just get comfortable with being close to other human beings.
Yeah.
In a very, just like a casual setting, right? It's really important.
Definitely. Human connection is huge, and social media and phones have really divided people and separated people. And I see a lot of young people who really were hurt by the isolation period of COVID, and so absolutely I recommend put down the phone, spend some time with an actual piece of equipment in your hand that you can make sound with and be with people that are passionate about it as well. Get some help from someone who's excited about it. I mean, because that passion is contagious.
Yeah. And, for all you adults listening out there, you think, oh, I'm old, so I'm going to start as an old person. No, guess what? The trajectory of music just translates to your age development. So if you've played for 4 years, you're like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old in terms of your developments. It doesn't matter if you're 50, 60, 70, whatever age, you're going to go through that development phase just like those kids did. And that's really fun to get to see that people can evolve and have that experience and actually look at it through adult eyes.
Yes, you can tell you've been doing this a long time. You're very eloquent in the way you make those points. I agree with you.
Ronny, it's such a pleasure. I'm so glad that Junior brought us together.